Dave the Hammer Schultz. In the 1970s, nobody in the NHL threw fists quite like Dave the Hammer Schultz. He was the muscle behind the Philadelphia Flyers' Broad Street Bullies, the man who gave that team its snarling, dangerous identity. Schultz wasn't just an enforcer. He was the enforcer that defined an entire decade of hockey toughness. During the Flyers' back-to-back Stanley Cups in 1974 and 1975, Schultz set a record that still stands today: 472 penalty minutes in a single season. To put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of almost 8 full games spent in the penalty box. No player before or since has come close to topping it. Every time Schultz stepped on the ice, opponents had to think twice about hitting Bobby Clarke or Reggie Leach because they knew the hammer was waiting. What made Schultz stand out from other fighters of his era was how often he set the tone for entire games. He didn't just react, he went on the offensive, controlling the energy of the building with a single fight. Players like Terry O'Reilly and Tiger Williams had reputations as wild men, but Schultz's combination of fearlessness and pure volume of fights made him one of the most notorious players in league history. And here's the kicker. While he didn't score many goals, he scored 2 of the most important. He helped protect the Flyers' stars long enough for them to lift the cup. Schultz wasn't just throwing punches, he was enforcing a dynasty. Terry O'Reilly. In Boston, toughness had a name, and it was Terry O'Reilly. He wasn't just another enforcer parked on the 4th line, he was the Bruins' heartbeat. Nicknamed Bloody O'Reilly, he played every shift like it was personal, and he wasn't shy about letting his fists do the talking. Over a career that spanned more than 890 games, O'Reilly piled up over 2,000 penalty minutes, but what set him apart was his ability to also play the game at a high level. He scored 204 goals and 402 assists, finishing his career with more than 600 points. That blend of scoring touch and absolute fearlessness made him one of the rare enforcers who was just as dangerous on the score sheet as he was in the corners. One of his most infamous moments came in 1979 when, after hearing relentless abuse from New York Rangers fans at Madison Square Garden, O'Reilly climbed into the stands and started throwing punches at hecklers. The image of him fighting fans cemented his reputation as a man who feared no one, not even an entire crowd. Compared to other enforcers of his era, O'Reilly was more than a bodyguard. He was a leader, eventually wearing the captain's C for Boston. Where someone like Dave Schultz terrified opponents with sheer volume of penalty minutes, O'Reilly made his mark with intensity and consistency. Night after night, he fought for his teammates and produced for his team. For Bruins fans, he wasn't just feared, he was adored because he played like one of them. Passionate, fiery, and completely unafraid. Clark Gillies on Long Island. Clark Gillies was the silent bodyguard who made sure the New York Islanders could dominate the 1980s. Gillies wasn't your typical enforcer, he was a rare hybrid, a power forward who could score 30 goals a season and then destroy you in a fight if you even thought about laying a finger on his teammates. During the Islanders' 4 straight Stanley Cups from 1980 to 1983, Gillies provided the protection that let skill players like Mike Bossy and Brian Trottier focus on scoring. When teams tried to rough them up, Gillies was always the answer. He fought only when it was necessary, but when he did, it was unforgettable. In the 1980 playoffs, Gillies famously squared off with Boston's Terry O'Reilly, pounding him so badly that the Bruins were forced to change their entire strategy. That fight is still remembered as a turning point for the Islanders. It sent a message that they couldn't be bullied, not even by the toughest team in the league. Over his career, Gillies scored 319 goals, added 378 assists, and piled up over 1,000 penalty minutes. That balance of offense and intimidation made him one of the most respected players of his era. Compared to pure enforcers like Dave Schultz or Tiger Williams, Gillies was unique because he could dominate with skill and toughness. Fans knew he could win a game with his stick or with his fists, and opponents dreaded both. Gillies didn't fight often, but when he did, the entire league took notice. His fists made sure the Islanders' dynasty never had to look over its shoulder. Tiger Williams. If hockey ever had a true wild man, it was Dave Tiger Williams. He wasn't just tough, he was unpredictable, a player who turned chaos into a career. Williams holds one of the most unbreakable records in NHL history, 3,966 penalty minutes. That's almost 66 hours in the box, more than anyone else by a mile. But unlike most enforcers, Tiger wasn't a one-dimensional fighter. He scored 241 goals in his career, and fans loved his flamboyant goal celebration, where he would ride his stick down the ice like a cowboy. That blend of grit and personality made him one of the most unforgettable characters in the game. On the ice, Williams played like he was born for the penalty box. He fought everyone, from heavyweights to skill players, and he didn't care about size or reputation. If a teammate was touched, Tiger responded instantly. What set him apart from other fighters like Schultz or Gillies was his unpredictability. Schultz was methodical, Gillies picked his moments, but Tiger was pure chaos. Nobody knew when or where he would explode. His fights were messy, wild brawls where technique didn't matter, only fury. Fans either loved him or hated him, but nobody ignored him. He was the NHL's ultimate loose cannon, the guy who might score a highlight reel goal one moment and then pummel a rival into the ice the next. The only consistent thing about Tiger Williams was that he never backed down, and opponents knew it the second he stepped over the boards. Marty McSorley. Every superstar needs a protector, and Wayne Gretzky had the toughest one of all, Marty McSorley. McSorley's job was crystal clear. If you touched Gretzky, you paid the price. First with Edmonton and later with the Los Angeles Kings, McSorley became Gretzky's shadow, following him from team to team to make sure the Great One could work his magic without fear. What made McSorley stand out was his endurance and sheer stamina in fights. Unlike many heavyweights who looked for a quick knockout, McSorley could go toe-to-toe for minutes at a time, trading punches until his opponent wore down. He battled legends like Bob Probert, Domi, and Dave Brown, and often came out on top simply because he never seemed to tire. Over his career, McSorley played nearly 1,000 NHL games and even had a season with 15 goals and 41 points, showing he could actually contribute offensively too. That's rare for an enforcer, and it made him far more valuable than just a set of fists. Compared to pure brawlers like Brashear or Boogaard, McSorley's game had layers. He could skate, pass, and play regular minutes, but at the end of the day, his fists were his biggest weapon. Gretzky himself has said that he always felt safe with McSorley on the ice, and that says it all. Nobody in their right mind wanted to test the Great One twice because standing in their way was a man who truly feared no one. McSorley wasn't just an enforcer. He was Gretzky's shield. Chris, Knuckles. Nilan. If you wore a Montreal Canadiens jersey in the 1980s, you felt safe the second Chris Knuckles Nilan hit the ice. Nilan wasn't the biggest guy in the league, but he had one of the biggest fight cards. Across his career, he racked up over 3,000 penalty minutes, most of them spent pounding on anyone who dared mess with his teammates. His nickname Knuckles wasn't a joke. His fists did all the talking. Nilan fought heavyweights like Bob Probert, Dave Brown, and Tiger Williams, and he never once ducked a challenge. What made him stand out was how often he fought. In fact, he once averaged a fight almost every other game in a season. Fans in Montreal adored him because he had that underdog spirit. He wasn't the most skilled, but he bled for the sweater every night. There's even a famous story of Nilan going toe-to-toe with Probert when most guys avoided him. Even if he lost, Nilan showed up, threw down, and made sure his team never got pushed around. Compared to enforcers like Schultz or McSorley, Nilan didn't protect a dynasty or a superstar. He built his own legend by simply refusing to be intimidated. Every time he dropped the gloves, he reminded the league that Montreal might have had finesse with Guy Lafleur and Patrick Roy, but they also had fists. Chris Nilan didn't fear anyone, and if you crossed the Canadiens, you were about to meet Knuckles. Bob Probert. When you talk about NHL enforcers, there's one name everyone agrees on, Bob Probert. He wasn't just a tough guy. He was the undisputed heavyweight champion of hockey fighting. With the Detroit Red Wings and later the Chicago Blackhawks, Probert became the gold standard for enforcers. He fought everybody and usually came out on top. Over his career, he piled up more than 3,300 penalty minutes, but what separated him from most enforcers was that he could also play. In 1987-88, Probert scored 29 goals and 62 points, proving he wasn't just a fist machine. He could skate on the top lines and still throw down with the toughest men in the league. Opponents dreaded seeing him on the ice because he combined size, stamina, and fearlessness. He had epic rivalries with Domi, Craig Cox, and Todd Ewan, with some fights lasting over a minute straight, basically two giants trading bombs until one couldn't stand. What really made Probert different was his aura. Other enforcers admitted they were nervous fighting him, and when your opponents, guys who fought for a living, say that, you know you're terrifying. Compared to technical fighters like Donald Brashear or Georges Laraque, Probert didn't need technique. He had sheer willpower and endless energy. Fans knew if Probert was on the roster, their stars could breathe easy. For nearly 2 decades, he set the standard. And to this day, when fans argue over the toughest NHL player ever, the first name that comes up is always Bob Probert. Domi. Domi might have been short for an NHL enforcer, standing just 5 feet 10 inches, but he was proof that size isn't everything. Domi carved out a reputation as one of the most fearless fighters in league history, taking on anyone, no matter how big they were. Over a career that spanned more than 1,000 games, he threw down more than 300 times and collected nearly 3,500 penalty minutes. What made Domi a cult hero, especially in Toronto, wasn't just his willingness to fight, it was who he fought. He challenged giants like Bob Probert, Donald Brashear, and even 6'8" John Scott later on. Fans loved his heart because Domi never looked for easy fights. His battles with Probert became the stuff of legend, with entire games building toward their inevitable brawls. He also had a showman's flair. He once waved at Madison Square Garden fans from the penalty box after fighting a Ranger, only to have a fan fall into the box trying to get at him. Domi laughed, squared up, and security had to pull the fan away. That kind of swagger made him unforgettable. Compared to someone like Marty McSorley, who was known as Gretzky's protector, Domi didn't guard one superstar. He was the protector of an entire franchise. Every Leafs fan knew he was fighting for them. He may not have been the biggest, but when it came to courage, Ty Domi stood taller than anyone. Stu Grimson, the Grim Reaper. With a nickname like the Grim Reaper, you already know Stu Grimson wasn't stepping onto the ice to make friends. Grimson was one of the most methodical, intimidating enforcers of the 1990s. He suited up for teams like Calgary, Anaheim, Chicago, and Nashville, and wherever he went, he made an immediate impact. Grimson wasn't the type to start wild brawls like Tiger Williams. Instead, he approached fighting like a chess match, calm, calculated, and terrifyingly efficient. Standing at 6'5", he used his reach to keep opponents off balance, and once he got going, he rarely lost. Over his career, he accumulated 2,100 penalty minutes and fought almost every heavyweight of his time, from Probert to Tony Twist. What set Grimson apart was his consistency. Night after night, he was ready to do the job, and teammates knew he would never hesitate. His fights weren't just for show. They carried a message: don't mess with my team. Compared to flashier enforcers like Domi or Williams, Grimson's intimidation came from discipline. He didn't need antics. His stare alone was enough to rattle opponents. Fans respected him because he combined toughness with professionalism, and later in life, he even became a lawyer, proving he had brains behind the fists. On the ice, though, he was pure menace. When the Grim Reaper dropped the gloves, everyone knew the fight was over before it started. Tony Twist. If there was one enforcer from the 1990s who scared even other enforcers, it was Tony Twist, playing for the Quebec Nordiques and later the Saint Louis Blues. Twist wasn't known for his scoring touch, he only managed 10 career goals, but when it came to throwing punches, he was legendary. Twist was built like a tank, with tree trunk arms and knockout power that could end a fight in seconds. Unlike some fighters who wore opponents down, Twist went for the kill shot right away. There are countless stories of players dreading the warm-up skate if they knew Twist was in the lineup. His punches were so powerful that teammates swore you could hear them land from the bench. Over his career, he piled up 1,121 penalty minutes, but numbers don't tell the whole story. His reputation did most of the work. Many players admitted they avoided challenging Twist because it simply wasn't worth it. You risked your career health going toe-to-toe with him. Compared to a fighter like Probert, who could battle for endurance, Twist was about raw, devastating force. He didn't fight often, but when he did, the clip made highlight reels for years. Sadly, his career was cut short after a motorcycle accident, but during his prime, Tony Twist was the NHL's knockout king. If you asked players from the 90s who they feared most, more often than not, the answer was the same: Twister. Donald Brashear. When you talk about technical fighters in the NHL, Donald Brashear is always near the top of the list. At 6'3" and 240 pounds, Brashear had the size of a heavyweight, but what really made him dangerous was his balance and fighting style. He wasn't wild, he was controlled. He tied guys up, leaned on them, and waited for the right moment to land bombs. That patience frustrated opponents because they couldn't get clean shots in. Brashear spent most of his career with Vancouver, Philadelphia, and Washington, and he became a nightmare for anyone foolish enough to challenge him. He fought legends like Ty Domi and Bob Probert, and while Probert gave him trouble early on, Brashear eventually became nearly unbeatable in his prime. One of the most infamous moments of his career came in 2000 when Marty McSorley, out of pure frustration, swung his stick at Brashear's head. The incident left Brashear concussed and McSorley banned from the league, but it also showed just how hard it was to beat him in a fair fight. Brashear racked up over 2,600 penalty minutes in his career, but he wasn't just fists. He played over 1,000 games, showing he could stay in the lineup for more than just fighting. Compared to brawlers like Tony Twist, who relied on knockout power, Brashear was about skill and strategy. He was the heavyweight champ of the early 2000s, and players across the league admitted that fighting him felt like trying to push down a brick wall. Georges Laraque was known as the Gentle Giant, and that nickname was perfect, until the gloves dropped. Standing 6'3" and 260 pounds, Laraque was one of the most respected enforcers of his generation. He was different from most tough guys because he fought with respect. Before dropping the gloves, Laraque would skate up to an opponent and ask, "Wanna go?" If they said yes, he'd oblige, and then he'd usually win. His fight card is full of big names: Donald Brashear, Zdeno Chara, and even Derek Boogaard. What made Laraque terrifying was his strength and technique. He almost never lost cleanly, and his balance made him nearly impossible to knock down. Over his career, he played for Edmonton, Montreal, and Pittsburgh, collecting 1,126 penalty minutes, but he also managed 153 points, proving he could chip in offensively. Fans loved him not just for his toughness, but for his personality. He was funny, approachable, and later even became a TV analyst. Compared to other fighters like Brashear, who were often intimidating and cold, Laraque's mix of friendliness off the ice and pure savagery on it made him stand out. When he squared up with you, there was no cheap shot, no sneak attack. It was man-to-man, center ice, and usually one-sided. Georges Laraque may have been a gentle soul off the rink, but when he fought, there was nothing gentle about him. Derek Boogaard, the Boogeyman. Few names in NHL fighting history carry as much fear as Derek Boogaard, known simply as the Boogeyman. At 6'7" and 270 pounds, he was one of the largest enforcers the game has ever seen. When he threw a punch, it wasn't just a hit, it was a knockout. Boogaard's fights often ended quickly because his size and power were overwhelming. Playing for the Minnesota Wild and later the New York Rangers, Boogaard collected 589 penalty minutes in just 277 career games, and almost every one of those minutes came from his role as a fighter. His reputation was so fierce that many players admitted they simply wouldn't go near him. His punches left lasting damage. One devastating KO of Todd Federuk shattered bones in Federuk's face, forcing him to get metal plates surgically inserted. That moment alone cemented Boogaard as one of the scariest fighters to ever step on NHL ice. What made him unique was that he wasn't flashy, he wasn't cocky, he was just a quiet, terrifying presence. Compared to showmen like Domi or Tiger Williams, Boogaard was pure intimidation. Sadly, his career and life were cut short due to struggles with painkillers and injuries, but his impact still echoes in NHL circles. To this day, when fans talk about the most feared enforcers, the Boogeyman is always near the top of the list: Colton Orr. By the mid-2000s, the role of the enforcer was fading, but Colton Orr kept the tradition alive. Orr wasn't the biggest name in hockey, but among fighters, he was a legend. Playing for the Boston Bruins, New York Rangers, and later the Toronto Maple Leafs, he built a reputation as one of the last pure heavyweights. He fought everyone: Donald Brashear, Chris Neil, and even the massive Derek Boogaard. Orr's style was aggressive and fearless. He wasn't worried about technique or point totals. He just wanted to stand up for his team. Over his career, he racked up 1,186 penalty minutes and became a fan favorite in Toronto, where fans always knew a fight was coming when Orr was dressed. One of his most famous moments came in 2009 when he dropped Donald Brashear in a fight, proving he could go toe-to-toe with one of the era's toughest. Compared to strategic fighters like Brashear, Orr was more of a throwback: pure fists, no patience, just all-out brawling. He didn't score much, finishing his career with only 12 goals, but that wasn't his job. His job was to make sure teammates like Phil Kessel or Matt Sundin never had to answer for cheap shots. Colton Orr's career marked the end of an era when teams still kept a fighter on the roster just to keep opponents honest. He was proof that even in a changing league, toughness still mattered. John Scott. John Scott might be the most unlikely enforcer story of them all. Standing 6'8" and 270 pounds, he was one of the tallest players to ever play in the NHL, and his size alone made him intimidating. Scott wasn't known for his skill. He only scored 5 career goals, but when it came to enforcing, he did the job. He played for several teams including Minnesota, Chicago, Buffalo, and San Jose, and along the way fought almost every major enforcer of his time. Nobody really wanted to fight him because his reach and size made him nearly impossible to handle. What truly made Scott a cult hero, though, was his shocking rise to All-Star Game MVP in 2016. Originally voted in as a joke by fans, Scott embraced the moment, went to the All-Star Game, scored twice, and walked away with MVP honors. It was the ultimate underdog story for a guy who spent his career protecting teammates and fighting giants. Compared to enforcers like Laraque or Probert, Scott never had the same win record in fights, but his sheer presence was enough to keep opponents honest. Fans loved him because he was self-aware, he knew his role, and never pretended to be anything else. By the time he retired, John Scott had become more than an enforcer. He was a symbol of hockey's tough guy culture and a reminder that sometimes even the most feared fighters can have a Cinderella moment.